If a visitor from another planet asked us to point out the single most strategically important place on Earth today, some might name Wall Street or Silicon Valley in the United States. Others might point to China's Shenzhen or Shanghai. The more sentimental might choose London City or the Suez Canal. Yet the most accurate answer would likely be something else entirely: the Strait of Malacca. Roughly 30% of global maritime trade passes through Malacca, which constitutes the 90% of all goods moved worldwide. In raw numbers, that's about 100,000 ships a year, nearly 300 a day, carrying cargo worth up to $4.5 billion. This includes as much as 30% of world's seaborne oil trade, covering 80% of China's oil imports. Add to that 40% of Japan's and South Korea's entire trade, and the scale of global dependence on Malacca becomes clear. So whenever an alternative route emerges that could shorten the journey, everyone pays attention, especially the Chinese. A quick look at a map of Southeast Asia reveals that Malacca's dominance is based on the 1,500-kilometer-long Malay Peninsula. It is the need to sail around Thailand and Malaysia that forces ships to pass through this choke point. But what if there were a way to cut straight through? That is the idea behind the Canal, or in its latest iteration, the Thai land bridge. Estimated at nearly $30 billion, the project could shorten voyages by up to 1,200 kilometers, save shippers as much as 5 days of travel, and leave up to $350,000 in their pockets on a single trip. That is why, after decades of deliberation, the Thai government now appears mobilized to finally launch this massive undertaking, much to the concern of Malacca's current hegemon, Singapore, and not only Singapore. The Thai initiative has attracted the interest of many: India, the UAE, the United States, and above all, China. Could the Thai land bridge be a game changer for Southeast Asia? Let's find out. The Canal shows how one project can reshape global trade routes and redraw the map of influence in Asia, when choke points like Malacca or new alternatives in Thailand can decide the fate of entire economies. Understanding cultures and languages becomes more than just useful. It is a real tool of influence and opportunity. That is why this episode is partnered with Speakly, the language learning app that helps you start speaking confidently up to several times faster than traditional methods. Speakly focuses on the words and phrases you actually use, and with its personal AI tutor, you get support 24/7, like having a private teacher always in your pocket. Learning is engaging too, with listening tasks, writing practice, and even music recommendations. And the best part? Speakly offers a lifetime plan. One payment and you can learn languages without limits, forever. Click the link in the description and check the offer. Plans to overcome the maritime barrier of the Malay Peninsula date back centuries, to the very dawn of global sea routes. In 1677, King Narai of Siam commissioned French engineer de la Mar to study the possibility of linking the city of Songkhla with Meik, now in Myanmar. With the technology of the time, the project, however, was doomed to failure. That did not mean subsequent rulers abandoned the idea. It resurfaced in the centuries that followed, sparking the interest of King Chakri's brother in 1793 and later in the early 19th century, the British East India Company. In 1882, none other than Ferdinand de Lesseps, builder of the Suez Canal, examined the concept, though the Thai king refused to allow a thorough research. From 1819 onward, however, when the British took control of Singapore, their priority was to strengthen this key hub, and any alternative route was seen as a threat. Thus, when Thailand and Britain signed agreements in 1897 and later in 1946, London always ensured one clause prohibited the construction of such a canal. It was only after Singapore became an independent republic in 1965 that Britain's interest in blocking a potential Thai canal faded. Just 7 years later, in 1972, Thailand's royal government commissioned two American firms, LTV and Tippett's Abbott McCarthy Stratton, to conduct a feasibility study for this massive project. The Americans proposed a 102-kilometer canal linking Santun with Songkhla, deep enough to handle large cargo ships and oil tankers. But the price tag was staggering, $8 billion at the time, equivalent to over $60 billion today. For a poor Thailand, it was far beyond reach. It would take another 30 years for the idea to return to the political mainstream, but by then its form had changed. In 2005, Thai Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra proposed not a canal, but a land bridge, a network of highways, rail lines and two massive ports designed to serve much the same function as the canal, without many of its drawbacks. Before delving into Shinawatra's proposal, it is worth pausing to understand why a potential Kra Canal would be an infrastructure and political challenge of truly monumental proportions, even with today's advanced technology. At first glance, the map looks promising. The shortest route linking the Andaman Sea to the Gulf of Thailand is a mere 44 kilometers in a straight line. By comparison, the Panama Canal is 77 kilometers long and the Suez Canal 192 kilometers. The problem lies in the terrain. Suez had ideal conditions. It runs through a flat region historically flooded by the sea. Panama was much more difficult, with a highest point of 64 meters, requiring a system of locks and artificial lakes. In Thailand, the challenge is even greater. The shortest route cuts through hills rising to 75 meters. To build a lock-free canal like the Suez would require digging down at least 25 meters to allow passage for the largest ocean-going vessels. This would push the canal's length beyond 100 kilometers, and at the depths approaching 50 meters, even to 300 to 400 kilometers. And so, in reality, other routes have been considered besides this relatively short one. The previously mentioned Satun-Songkhla line was one. Another proposed route would connect Bandon Bay near Surat Thani to Phang Nga province. But the most talked about one was the so-called 9A route, starting from Koh Lanta in Krabi province and running to Nakhon Si Thammarat. In this version, the canal would be just 120 kilometers long, a theoretically feasible project even within Thailand's limited financial means. It would shorten container ship voyages by 1,200 kilometers, saving up to 5 days at sea and around $350,000 per trip. So why has the Thai Canal never been built? And why have former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra and now his daughter, Paetongtarn, until recently Prime Minister, turned to the idea of a land bridge instead? Because like any complex undertaking, the issue is multidimensional. Let's start with infrastructure and geography. A canal of 100 to 120 kilometers would indeed be longer than Panama's, but still almost half the length of Suez. And the former was completed over 110 years ago, and the latter 156 years ago. A technological world away from today. But we must remember one critical point. The pressure to build both canals was immense, because the cost and time savings they offered were extraordinary. Even today, ships transiting the Suez Canal can save up to 9,000 kilometers and 10 days of sailing, depending on their route. For Panama, the savings can reach 13,000 kilometers and 20 days, up to a month a century ago. In that light, the Thai Canal's 1,200 kilometer shortcut and 2 to 5 day reduction seem less impressive. Its advantage, however, lies in the fact that global maritime trade is constantly expanding and is hundreds of times larger than it was 100 years ago. Moreover, Malacca itself has capacity limits and occasionally experience congestion. From a purely economic standpoint, then, the Kra Canal still makes sense. while it would not deliver the transformative impact of Suez or Panama, the sums involved in global trade are so vast that the project could easily attract financing. And so other factors seem more decisive in explaining why the canal has never been built. First, it would damage unique natural ecosystems, rainforests and pristine coastal waters. By contrast, the Suez Canal cuts through what is essentially a desert delta. The environmental toll in Panama was certainly greater, but 110 years ago, ecological concerns carried far less weight than today. And still, the canal was over 50% shorter than what Thailand would require. Still, if there were enough money to be made, even this would not be an insurmountable obstacle. And so the most critical reason for the project's absence is that it would pose a threat to Thailand's territorial integrity. Physically, it would cut the country's mainland in two, with a 14-meter wide strip of water, a formidable barrier. And it must be remembered that for 2 decades, the Thai government has faced armed groups in the south challenging Bangkok's authority. In the last 20 years alone, fighting between government forces and local militias has claimed some 7,000 lives. It is precisely this combination, a relatively modest time saving compared to other such projects, the historical obstruction by great powers, and Thailand's own financial, separatist, and institutional challenges that led Alan Stevens Graham of the US Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey to write in his 1975 thesis, quote, "It is doubtful that the Kra Canal will ever become a reality." And he might well have been right, were it not for one factor he did not take into account: China. In the third decade of the 21st century, China as a force reshaping the status quo has become a recurring theme. It seems that this could well be another such case. China is building its power across multiple domains: military, resource security, technology, and diplomacy. But like the mythic Achilles, it has its vulnerable heel. The Strait of Malacca is one of them, arguably its greatest. 80% of China's imported oil passes through the Strait of Malacca, and that is only the tip of the iceberg. The same route is used for LNG as well as for transporting thousands of tons of metals and other raw materials from Africa. And Malacca is not only a vital import route, but also the main artery for China's exports to the West and the Middle East. As is well known, the Middle Kingdom's economic power relies heavily on exports. There are also strategic considerations, such as the opening to the Indian Ocean, which is a key element of China's maritime strategy. And so Beijing's dependence on this choke point is enormous. So much so that it has acquired its own name: the Malacca Dilemma. For China, therefore, any pressure valve to ease what it sees as encirclement is worth its weight in gold. A Thai canal would give the Chinese Navy quicker access to the Indian Ocean and reduce its vulnerability to maritime blockades. It could also become a critical link in China's String of Pearls network, strengthening its bases and supply routes in the Indian Ocean. Quote, "Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative already supports alternate corridors like Myanmar's Kiakpiu Port and China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, but a functioning Thai land bridge connected to China's southwestern provinces via Laos would be a game changer." In May 2024, Chinese delegations from Kunming and Chengdu visited Ranong and Chumphon, signaling clear interest. Notes Charhar Institute analyst Hao Nan. What would be a game changer for China would also be a warning light for others. Once the conversation moves into great power politics, the project takes on an entirely new dynamic. Because Beijing would gladly see and support such a development, but India would likely view it as an open invitation for Chinese access to its backyard, the Indian Ocean. The United States, following zero-sum logic, would treat the canal with deep suspicion, seeing it as a potential solvent of its naval advantage in the region. And then there is the local champion, Singapore, which, while not a global power, carries weight in this corner of the world. A Thai canal would strike directly at the heart of the economic miracle that is Singapore. And in the end of this tangled web of interests lies Thailand, a country that is certainly important in terms of the balance of power, but still one that must heed the opinions of the larger powers. Therefore, while the canal would bring economic benefits, it would increase the risk of separatism and draw the wrath of the US, India and Singapore. It would also create the danger of excessive dependence on China. This is where former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra's concept of a land bridge between Thailand's eastern and western coasts comes back into play. A plan now closer than ever to becoming reality. One gets the sense that Thai decision makers, after weighing up the factors outlined above, concluded that the land bridge offers the best answer to this strategic puzzle. What does the concept involve? The idea is to build two major deep water ports, one in Ranong on the Andaman Sea and one in Chumphon on the Gulf of Thailand, linked by a 50 to 100 km stretch of highway and railway across the peninsula's narrowest point. Cargo arriving at one port would be unloaded, transported overland and reloaded onto ships on the other side. The route's capacity is estimated at 13 to 20 million TEUs. While this is modest compared to Singapore's 40 million TEUs, it would still be a major port comparable to the significant Malaysian port of Klang, which handles 13 million TEUs a year. Quote, "This will be a global mega project which will shorten the duration of goods transport via the channel of the Malacca Strait by 6 to 9 days, said Thai Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra at the Thailand-China Investment Forum. These are highly optimistic estimates. More realistic ones suggest up to 5 days saved in shipping time and a 15% reduction in costs. The price tag? Over $30 billion. With the Ranong-Chumphon land bridge, Bangkok aims to have its cake and eat it too. In this scenario, Thailand taps into the enormous potential of the region's trade routes while reducing the risk of fueling separatist sentiment. The cost is likely 2 to 3 times lower than the canal option. Most importantly, it eases great power tensions. China remains interested, but the United States, India and Singapore view it with less concern, or even with a measure of approval. Thailand also intends, shrewdly, to invite third-party players to take part in the project. In April of this year, Narendra Modi signaled India's interest in the project, expressing a willingness to participate. Delhi has concluded that rather than blocking the initiative, it is better to be inside the tent, shaping it from within, and thereby reducing China's influence. The United States has also adopted a conciliatory stance. After all, the project poses no major threat to Singapore. Even with the growth of global trade, Malacca's importance will remain pivotal. Singapore's advantages go far beyond geography. It boasts an entire ecosystem of port management, ancillary services, logistics, and automation. In short, it is much more than just a prime location. Seeking balanced financing and an experienced operator, the Thai government is also looking toward the Middle East, particularly Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, including the powerful Emirati firm DP World, which has extensive experience and capabilities in such ventures. The involvement of the UAE, Saudi Arabia or India would also help reduce dependence on China. Add to this 280,000 new jobs and a potential GDP boost of 1.5%. And it might seem like the perfect golden mean, right? Unfortunately, it is not that simple. Estimates of GDP growth, job creation and integration into global trade routes sound compelling, but some readers may have raised an eyebrow when hearing the operational details of the Thai land bridge. Unloading ships, transferring cargo to rail or road, and then reloading it onto other ships sounds like a logistical nightmare. At 13 million TEUs, this would mean handling around 35,000 containers per day. And you wouldn't be wrong to suspect trouble. Logistical challenges are cited by experts as one of the project's most critical potential pitfalls. While Thailand's Prime Minister promotes the land bridge as saving up to 9 days of shipping time, skeptics argue that compared with Malacca, it could actually end up taking longer. Public opposition is also brewing. Environmental degradation might be less severe than with a canal, but it would still be significant. Moreover, as many as 65,000 people would face relocation. The influential Bangkok Post even ran an editorial under the pointed headline, "Land Bridge, a disaster in waiting." Add to this the dominant position of Singapore's port and Malaysia's port Klang, and the question resurfaces: is it worth it? Despite the Thai government's active search for partners and numerous high-level meetings, no major player has yet formally committed to the project, even after the creation of a $9 billion infrastructure fund to support its development. Even China appears less determined. Although the land bridge would fit within the Belt and Road Initiative, it is a far smaller strategic prize than an ocean-going canal. Bangkok's own caution has also tempered Beijing's enthusiasm. The current political crisis in Thailand has only added fuel to the fire. The scandal surrounding the leak of a conversation between Paetongtarn Shinawatra and the former Cambodian Prime Minister, Hun Sen, resulted in the collapse of the government coalition and Paetongtarn's removal from office. Such political instability makes it difficult to push through projects that require consistency and billions of dollars worth of investments. Matters were made worse in past weeks when Thaksin Shinawatra, the project's political patron, and Paetongtarn's father, was imprisoned for a year. However, the project has the advantage of cross-party support, so political turmoil does not necessarily spell its end. Public consultations have now concluded, and the Southern Economic Corridor Bill has been submitted to the Senate. Optimistic forecasts suggest that construction could begin as early as next year. Could the project be in full swing by 2026? Perhaps that is the spark needed to get the project moving. In 1975, Alan Stevens Graham predicted that the Kra Canal would never be built. 50 years later, his forecast still holds true. Will it also apply to the slimmed-down version, the land bridge? We will find out soon enough.